Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of History, Science, Fiber. My name is Zoe McDonald. I'm a wildlife biologist, and today I am standing on the banks of the beautiful and mighty Fraser River in British Columbia to talk to you about a few different topics. I keep getting questions about this, so let's dive in. So the first topic I want to cover today is, should you be dyeing with things that are poisonous? Should you dye with them and then knit with them and give them away as gifts? Is it safe to knit a baby blanket with them? Let's talk about things that are poisonous. I think the first thing that's important is that natural dyeing has a context in the modern age, and that context is the textile apparel industry. When it comes to commercially dyed yarn, commercially dyed fabrics, it's the top 5th source of industrial pollution in the world. It's incredibly toxic and is responsible for 10% of all carbon dioxide emissions on the planet, which is more than every commercial flight combined in a year. It's a huge source of pollution. It's a huge source of contamination. And there are rivers in China and Bangladesh that are inky black next to where people live and children play because of the commercial dyes that are used. So just the fact that you're dyeing with natural dyes is a huge step in the right direction, especially if you're foraging for your own. I think the carbon footprint is very small. But on to things that are poisonous and toxic. I didn't use the term toxic at first because, situations or people or relationships can all be toxic. So what does toxic even mean anymore? I don't know. But when things that are poisonous, one thing to keep in mind is that, and now this is something that I wouldn't necessarily share with children because I want them to be really safe around fungi if we're out on a hike or whatever, but it's ingesting poisonous mushrooms that is the problem. You can actually pick up and hold a poisonous mushroom. You should wash your hands afterwards. But when you dye, it seems to be that when you're dyeing with materials that are inedible or have components that might harm you, dyeing with them seems to be that the pigments, the molecules that bind to the fiber, those pigments stay and everything else gets washed. Now, if you're dyeing, you should definitely rinse till the water is clear. When I'm dyeing with mushrooms, I usually leave the fiber, in the dye bath overnight, like sort of let it, after I've heated it for an hour, leave it overnight, and that seems to really help set the color. But then I'm going to rinse it. So I definitely think you should rinse really well. I don't think it's a major issue in terms of toxins or things that are poisonous. Having said that, not a lot of work's been done. So, maybe for the most, we've got a few of the polypore mushrooms that give spectacular purples, but are known to be poisonous. Maybe not the best thing for baby blanket if babies are sucking on them. But I think in general, it'll be good. And if you really, really want to stick to things that are edible, you can. There's some dye mushrooms. I have some videos on my channel, lobster mushrooms, blue chanterelles, which have huge medicinal properties, including shrinking stomach cancers and combating Alzheimer's. So that's definitely what I would say is it's okay to dye with them. And again, you want to keep separate equipment for dyeing, as I try to say in all the videos. Keep separate dye equipment to cooking. Second topic I want to cover today is ethical wildcrafting. What are some guidelines you can use to make sure that the foraging that you do isn't harmful for the environment and is responsible? When I started out being interested in conservation and being interested in the environment, I had a very black and white view. There were parks, which were good, and then there were not parks or, other land uses, and they were not as good. And I ended up doing a master's in conservation biology in Africa, and that helped me understand that a lot of the history of parks is actually pretty racist. It often involves people sitting around a table, delineating the borders, and then sending in trucks or other vehicles to move often indigenous people out of it. And that's certainly the case here in Vancouver with Stanley Park, which is our sort of the equivalent of Central Park in New York, where 3 indigenous communities were moved out. And it's the same, we see the same pattern everywhere. So a more nuanced view, a more modern view is, of course, I'm not ripping on parks. The parks are critical for biodiversity conservation, but there's also a more modern concept of conservancies, the idea of conserving wild spaces while still allowing for foraging, for hunting, for traditional land uses. And some of these things actually maintain, if not improve, biodiversity. And we see that there's a really famous TED Talk that talks about some of these parks in the southern United States and how there's been, with the loss of the buffalo, there's been a loss of biodiversity, and actually how running cattle through them could actually increase biodiversity by the layers of dung, having seeds and maintaining the moisture in the soil and some of these things. So land use isn't always black and white. And it's the same with foraging. And I think a great book, if this is a topic you're interested in, is Braided Sweetgrass. It's a fabulous book. I absolutely love it. And it talks about some of the studies that the author, who is both a botanist and indigenous, did in terms of foraging and how that can actually improve what we call beta biodiversity. Some nuance. When it comes to foraging in your area, you're going to need to do the legwork in terms of where you can forage and where you can't forage. If it's on private land, you need to ask permission. For my job, I have certifications that I don't want to ever risk, so I don't forage in parks. I often I'll just do my photography, and then I forage in other areas. So in terms of ethical wildcrafting, there's really 3 basic rules that we like to follow. One is, don't take more than you need. Just take as much as you need. Don't kill something if you just need a part of it. And then the third one is, don't take more than the population can stand. And really that last part is especially important when it comes to rock lichens. Rock lichens, when you're dyeing with lichen, you can boil it, which usually gives you your oranges, your browns, your yellows, or you can ferment certain ones, especially rock lichens that are very slow growing. You can put them in a vat with half ammonia and half water, and you shake them a couple times a day, and et cetera, and that will allow you to create purples and pinks. But rock lichens tend to be very slow growing, and so you want to be very, very careful, and they're very sensitive to air quality. So, the air quality is not as good as it used to be. So that's definitely something to think about. A lot of people who get into dyeing with lichens end up not dyeing with rock lichens. I have dyed in the past with them. I might still do a video on one. But again, one of the rules would be, when I'm out, I would never take more than 10%. I would never take more, if there was a big rock face, than 10% of any. And even then, I don't generally dye with rock lichens anymore, but you can. And then the other rule too with rock lichens is usually, go out in a pair for safety, but just have one of you collecting. You don't want to be collecting together for the same thing, because that tends to hammer populations. Another thing that's worth mentioning is what about dyeing with invasives. So, one of the 2 terms that I think deserves to be sort of teased out is, what is an exotic species and what is an invasive species? So just because something is from somewhere else doesn't mean that it's doing harm. And a classic example here on the West Coast are English oaks. They're here. We've planted them in the city, but they don't seem to be taking over. They don't seem to be growing wild. They're not out competing anything. So we would call that an exotic species. Whereas something like tansy is an invasive, or Himalayan blackberry is a classic. It's not a good dyer, but it takes over, it pushes out native plants, and it creates these sort of monoculture mats. So when it comes to those types of species, they are from somewhere else, they're taking over. If you can dye with them or do other crafting, you can really harvest as much as you want, because you are helping, by harvesting more of it, we are creating space for our native plants to grow. So that's an important consideration as well. And the other topic we should cover today is safety. What are some things you can do to make sure your forages are as safe as they possibly can? And this is, again, a nuanced area, especially if you are part of a targeted community. You're part of a community that is targeted by your race, by your gender identity, by your sexuality. These are some really important questions. How do I stay safe, and how do I feel safe in the woods? So one of the things I would say for a forage is I would always treat it like you're going on a hike. So I would make sure to have, you need to communicate with people where you're going. You want to carry, you want to have your phone with you, but you can't always rely on that. So I would bring a compass, I would bring food, I would bring stuff for the weather. I would always want to have water with you. I would want to at least go with one other person or more when you're going out, and have a check-in system set up, have a plan, in case things can go sideways, as they sometimes do. And as always, where I'm in the woods, either for work or for foraging or hiking, I live in bear country, so I'm also trying to be very bear aware, as well. So those are some things to think about for sure. And in terms of being part of a targeted community, I have seen a lot of legwork being done on social media with foraging groups in different areas, taking lead where there's subgroups. A leader says, hey, I'm part of this targeted community, and they'll do specific forages. I think that is a really great idea. I think we need, I would love to see more people doing that as well, because it is so important to get out and to feel safe and to be safe. And if you don't feel safe, then it's really just no fun at all. And the other thing I want to talk about, maybe for the first time on this channel, is what do I do? What is my background, and why am I addressing these topics today? So I grew up here on the west coast of British Columbia. My father was a senior partner in a law firm, and he quit his job when I was growing up to work full-time in the environmental movement. And so growing up, we would march and we would stuff envelopes and we would work on all these campaigns to save areas of old growth like Mears Island, Clackwood Sound, Flores Island. These are the places that I grew up trying to protect. And as I got older, I started realizing when you're in conservation, you're passionate about conservation, you're up against people who have much deeper wallets and much better PR departments than you have. And I still see that to this day on social media, people in conservation, sort of a David and Goliath situation. So I was watching all this and I thought, I'm going to go into biology and I'm going to try and see if being a biologist will help me get a platform that can help me advocate better for biodiversity and conservation. And so I got a degree in wildlife biology. And I also, during that process, did a semester overseas in what was called Study in Africa program, which was a 4-month program, like a semester. And I lived in tents in East Africa and saw what conservation was like in a very, very different regulatory and obviously geographically different area. And that really gave me a basis for feeling very passionate about conservation in Africa. So after my degree, I went back, I got a master's, this time in conservation biology, which is the branch of biology that looks at how you apply scientific principles and other systems of knowledge to active management on the ground. So I got that degree, and then I stayed in Africa and I worked, I did my master's with WWF, World Wildlife Fund. I then did proposal writing for Conservation International, and again in the fundraising department, this time for Peace Parks Foundation, which is an Africa-based organization with the lower 11 countries in Africa, looking at what are called transfrontier conservation areas, or TFCAs. I was there with my husband for almost 4 years, and then we moved back to Canada. And I've been here doing wildlife biology for now, has it been 12, 15 years, about that. And so my main focus of my job is management of endangered or threatened wildlife species, some plants and some other stuff as well. But mainly it's designing the field programs and looking for detections and management and looking at how we can adjust development that the government or other people want to have happen, and how we can adjust that for the management of species. And now, my last few years, I strictly just work with First Nations, supporting them in what they want to see in their, you can call it traditional territories or traditional caregiver areas. So making sure that helping them advocate for the management that they want to see based on their traditional values, as well as helping get funding for restoration works. So that's what I'm doing quite a bit of right now, and I absolutely love it. So I've been active, I guess, on 2 continents in terms of conservation, and I feel really passionately about it. And it wasn't until just within the last sort of 5 years or so that I've really thought about combining the things that I love. The other piece of the puzzle is during all of this, I also do historical cosplay, which is like a medieval recreation group that I'm a part of. It's kind of like history as it should have been. So it's like history if it had been, you know, equity with women and sort of EDI stuff, or equity, inclusivity, and diversity. You know, queer positive spaces for historical recreation is kind of the idea. That's about it for this video. Feel free to post below if you have any questions, and like and subscribe for more content on natural dyeing.